people don't always make sense.
How come?
Because bad things happen to everyone. And it's hard to keep being yourself after they do. But part of growing up is doing what's best for the people you care about, even if sometimes that means hurting someone else.
I don't want to hurt anyone.
It's not that easy.
I'm scared, Lee.
What can I tell you to make it better?
That you won't leave me.
Oh, I wouldn't do that. I promise.
It amazes me how, for a game that has been out for quite some time, still produced one of the greatest pieces of storytelling that gaming has ever brought. Part of what made the storytelling of Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1 so great was the characters. The characters in the game being one of the key factors that made this game what it is. The characters being one of the main reasons making us, the player, feel like we were part of the world. With this, I wanted to talk about one of the characters that through his actions made us enjoy playing him and overall love his character, this being Lee Everett. Throughout all 5 episodes in Season 1, it's pretty apparent that the main theme of the story is that you have the surrogate father protecting this little girl who was unfortunate enough to have to live through the horrors of what the world has become and overall prepare her for what she now has to live with. Starting in Episode 1, A New Day, we first get introduced to Lee, who originally before the outbreak was heading to prison, which in the later episodes explains that Lee was convicted for killing the state senator who was having an affair with his wife. But due to a sudden encounter with a walker on the highway, crashing down a hill, killing the then undead police officer, Lee heads to a nearby house and learns from the voicemails that the residents of the house traveled to Atlanta but were unable to come back, leaving Clementine all alone with no one to look after her.
Oh my God, finally. I don't know if you tried to reach us. All the calls are getting dropped. They're not letting us leave and aren't telling us anything about Atlanta. Please, just leave the city and take Clementine with you back to Murrieta. I've got to get back to the hospital. Please let me know that you're safe.
But the one moment that made Lee such a lovable character is him deciding that until he finds Clementine's parents that he'll look after her till then. The reason why Lee's decision to look after Clementine is such a big thing is that the odds of someone deciding to take care of an 8-year-old girl, especially during an apocalypse where the literal dead are walking in plain sight, is unlikely since people are more likely to look after themselves. And even if the person did decide to look after Clementine, it's hard to believe anyone would go to the extent of looking for her parents like Lee did. So the act of Lee going through so much just to look after this little girl and to go through so much to help her look for her parents when he didn't have to is a pretty noble act.
You've been all by yourself through this?
Yeah, I want my parents to come home now.
I think that might be a little while, you know?
Oh.
Look, I don't know what happened, but I'll look after you until then.
So this choice is practically the foundation of why Lee is such a beloved character. You can see the progressiveness of Lee's character where instead of looking after himself, he realizes that he now has a little girl he has to protect. It goes for the same for the person playing as Lee, because now they have someone else to think about in terms of making decisions. That's why in the beginning you can see that Lee is pretty anxious at first since he's never been in this situation before. Now put in a parental role despite not having kids himself.
How about you help us clear the way and we'll take you and your daughter out of here and down to my family's farm. It should be safer there.
I'm not her dad. I'm her babysitter. Her parents are out of town.
But throughout the story, you see that some of the characters you encounter give you advice on protecting Clementine, whether it's them being a parent themselves, or advice on how to give her the best chance of surviving in this new environment. And you can see the development between the two where they gotten so close with each other you could say that they were like father and daughter. One of the main things that I feel as though doesn't really get talked about is how Lee protecting, guiding, and making sacrifices for Clementine is almost like he's trying to redeem himself from his past actions. The main issue Lee had to deal with is that still traversed into the apocalyptic world was his past with killing the state senator. Even though it seemed as though Lee was freed from having to deal with the end results of his actions, there were still people that knew of him that were skeptical and didn't really know the whole story, and some where they decided that he was a threat to them and their family despite not knowing the whole situation. With this playing the game, you will see that again, Lee had to be wary of what exactly is the best course of action to keep Clementine safe. Is it telling her about your past, of what you did before the outbreak? Is it taking her to her dairy farm in hopes to feed her despite barely knowing the people who own it, or taking someone else's belongings from their station wagon to further benefit her well-being? And obviously more things on that, but you get the idea. And the game makes this idea that almost every choice that Lee makes has some level of death, no matter how big or small. That tells you that this may or may not affect him, but also Clementine. And the reason why I say this is the remember system. Throughout the whole game, you have this add-on to the game where the choices Lee makes, some of the characters will keep in the back of their mind, whether good or bad. This also with Clementine, which further gives you the sense of your choices matter, kind of, and that you really have to understand what's the best course of action, not just for yourself, but for Clementine. One of my favorite scenes from Season 1 that I would say is pretty underrated is the talk with the stranger. Knowing the story, you would know that the stranger was the person who owned the station wagon, and the group ultimately decided on taking the belongings inside after escaping the St. John Dairy, and was the person who Clementine was talking to her on a radio, getting knowledge on what's going on as well as luring her to Savannah to see her parents. Anyways, the reason why I love this scene is mainly because of how the stranger is like your judge, your end result screen in a video game, telling you what you did wrong, what you should have done differently, and saying that you could have done better protecting Clementine. Once you really understand the scene, you would realize that no matter how good or bad you've done in essentially raising Clementine, you will still be accused of not doing enough. Thus the stranger saying that he would have done a better job himself.
Lee, listen to me. I need you to hear this before what happens next. I can take care of her. We can have a family. I know how to be a dad, you know. She wouldn't be exposed to what she has been with you.
Now, I've seen some talk about how the stranger is not a well put together villain due to the fact that he's mainly there to gain sympathy from the player, be a foil towards you, and essentially your choices not having that much weight since he blames you anyway. I'll respond by saying that's the point, at least the majority of the message being portrayed here. The stranger mentions him and his family, losing his son while hunting, losing the station wagon from Lee's group, and eventually losing his wife and daughter due to his son's absence. The stranger himself is supposed to be hypocritical because from the point of losing his son to his current point in the story, he has not been able to mentally handle his family's passing. With this, his judgment is so off to the point where he needs to blame someone else for his situation. So he blames Lee. And the whole reason as to why this whole debacle with him and Clementine talking on the radio and the kidnapping happens is that he wants to start again, a family, trying to substitute his son and daughter for Clem instead of dealing with the issues and taking the accountability from his now deceased family. The other point to this is coming to the realization that Lee tried his best when it came to taking care of Clementine. And despite what the stranger says, Lee took risks and made the hard decisions to keep her safe and alive. Cutting her hair short for her safety, teaching her to shoot, as well as teaching her to be brave in the midst of chaos. All this to say that Lee Everett is an amazing character, a very much lovable character. Why? Well, one, if it wasn't for him, odds are Clementine would have had a similar situation to the boy in the attic. Scared, afraid, and nobody to look after her, and, frankly, would have died. And two, he decided to take the torch and go through literal trials from now raising a child in this horrible world, saving her from cannibalistic monsters, saving her from the bandits, saving her from her kidnapper, which, by the way, despite being bit, went through a horde of walkers to get to said place she mentioned her parents were staying, with a cleaver and a glass shard, and on top of that was still teaching her how to defend and protect herself even on the brink of death. I think it says a lot from a character, not just with the things that I mentioned, but also the fact that when Lee found out that he was bit, knowing full well that he was going to die soon, still first thing he was concerned for was Clementine's well-being and safety.
Oh my god.
No way. No fucking way.
There's no time to worry about me. Clementine's gone.
There's no chance she just wandered off on her own?
No way.
Then who the hell took her?
I don't know. Last night Vernon came to me and offered to take her with him. Said she'd be better off.
Son of a bitch. I knew we couldn't trust that fucker.
Wherever she is, I have to find her.
That in itself shows not only the growth of Lee's character, but ultimately shows that no matter what, he was willing to do anything to protect and keep Clementine safe. Despite no longer being with her, his influence definitely made its way not just towards her, but us the player as well. With this, I think it's fair to say, thank you, Lee.